The Supreme Court has cleared the way for Alabama to redraw its congressional map ahead of this November's midterm elections. Now, in a 6-3 ruling, the nation's highest court allowed the state to use a Republican-drawn map that eliminates one of two majority black districts. Less than 2 weeks ago, the court voided Louisiana's congressional map after determining it relied too heavily on race. In both decisions, all Republican-appointed judges ruled in the majority, and all Democratic-appointed justices dissented. Earlier on CBS Morning News, the CEO and president of the National Urban League, Mark Morial, told our Errol Burnett the decision is irresponsible.
This decision strikes at the heart of American democracy, and the Supreme Court, which has a responsibility towards fairness and justice, has basically become a partisan political court made up, I think, of political hacks who decide what they want the outcome to be, and then they go back and try to justify it in their decision.
Joining us now is David Becker. We're very lucky to have him on set with us. Normally in D.C., he's a CBS News election law expert and contributor. He's also the executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. Is Mark Morial right? Is this a threat to democracy?
Well, I can understand why he's got problems with what's happened. Just in the last 2 weeks, think about this. The Supreme Court overturned basically decades of precedent with regard to the Voting Rights Act, leading to a feeding frenzy of redistrictings. We've seen Louisiana redistricting, we've seen Alabama redistricting, we've seen Tennessee redistrict, we're seeing South Carolina redistrict right now. That comes after we had already been at the point where we'd seen more mid-decade redistrictings than ever before. In the last year, we'd seen about 8 or so prior to that Voting Rights Act ruling. We had seen 3 in the previous 50 years. So that is just a remarkable change. And we are seeing things like with the Virginia Supreme Court ruling just last week, where Republican-appointed judges seem to be rushing to allow for Republican gerrymanders that benefit the party in next year's elections. I mean, there are some legal bases for some of these claims, but on the other hand, there's a principle that the Supreme Court has always applied, at least in recent decades, called the Purcell principle. And that principle says that when there's a change very close to an election, courts should be very, very careful about implementing that change. They should let elections go forward because we want to avoid voter confusion and chaos. That's what we're seeing right now. Right now, the courts seem to be inviting that chaos rather than restraining it in some way.
So, as you know, David, Florida and Tennessee have already changed their maps in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling. Alabama is now poised to do the same. There's a discussion happening, which is you have some Republicans who say, hey, this is a good thing. Why are Democrats angry about this? This means that people will perhaps vote for a black conservative in a majority black district. And Democrats who say, look, we understand what's going on here. There's one Republican member of the Senate, Tim Scott. There are a couple of Republican congressmen now, but they're all resigning or they're all leaving office to run for other office. So there will not be a black Republican in Congress during the next term. So help me understand that. I mean, are Republicans saying, is that accurate? Or is it really a way to disenfranchise not just black voters, but black voters who typically vote for Democrats?
Yeah, I mean, there's some misunderstandings about what the Voting Rights Act protected in the first place. The Voting Rights Act did not protect minority voters in a way that it guaranteed them representation that looked like them. That's not what it said. It said that minority voters had to have an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. And in every single case, it required that the plaintiffs showed that white voters were voting as a bloc to prevent minority voters from electing their candidates. And in all of these states, that's what's happened for decades. And it's gotten a little bit better, but still, even recently, we've seen nearly unanimous white voting against black candidates of choice. And so that's what was happening here in these states. And just by changing the standard in the Voting Rights Act, that's not going to go away. So we are going to see likely a blanching of the South, which is unfortunate because we're talking about states like Louisiana, for instance. 33% of all voters in Louisiana are black. And they might draw a plan in which 1 out of the 6 districts, or maybe 0 out of the 6 districts, give black voters an equal opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. And there are cities like New Orleans, a great American city that happens to be majority black. They might have no representation in Congress because it gets carved up into other areas where whites might predominate. And can you imagine back when Hurricane Katrina had hit, if New Orleans had not had any black representation, had not had any representation of that city at all? And that's what we're heading towards as there's this rush to grab partisan power in these states in the aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling.
Well, so yesterday, I mean, now we're going to add another to the list. Virginia filed an emergency push with the Supreme Court to reinstate its voter-approved congressional map. How do you think that one's going to play out?
Well, it's a long shot. I mean, the Virginia Supreme Court ruled on this matter based on state law grounds. So the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, doesn't have a lot of grounds on which it can overturn that judgment. It's actually, interestingly, drawing on some legal precedent that Republicans had previously used in order to, called the independent state legislature theory, trying to give state legislatures more power over these issues. I don't think it's likely to succeed. I think that Virginia Supreme Court ruling was very odd. I mean, it basically fell on this interpretation of the term election day and whether election day is when early voting starts or when voting ends. We all know that we all interpret Election Day as being when voting ends. Election Day is that Tuesday in November, but they ruled otherwise, and that's why they held that the referendum was not legally passed. They had opportunities to rule on that much earlier as well. So there were some issues with that ruling, but very unlikely the United States Supreme Court is going to find grounds to overturn it.
Wow.
All right. David Becker, really appreciate
Great
the
to have you here.
context
Yeah,
and
thanks.
insight.
Great to be here.
Thank you.